My guest Gary Estcourt talks about heritage development, archaeology, sustainable tourism, and community engagement. He is the founder of BCN Heritage. His focus is on developing programs to activate heritage places. He encourages heritage professionals to work with local community. His underlying philosophy is that any potential reuse has to be guided by the local community. They understand their needs and limitations, and it is through process of engagement we can start to work with communities to achieve valid outcomes. This is the reason I have been looking forward to our conversation today. Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I am Azban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I am bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Hello,
Hey, Ezra, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good, thanks, mate.
Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, no, I appreciate it.
Oh, so glad that you have answered an affirmation for this interview because I love heritage places and I really want it to be of some use, of some, benefit for my places over here. And I love to see the places in other cities and other countries as well. So thank you for the work you are doing and thank you for joining me. And I'm looking forward to learning from you.
Thank you, Ezra. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. Sorry, the cat just jumped in. Sorry, mate.
Okay. Okay, so tell me about that. How did you find your passion for heritage places?
Um, Look, before I start any conversation about heritage places, for me, it's really about connection to place. And so with that in mind, I'm actually speaking from Darug country in Western Sydney. The Darug are the traditional Aboriginal owners of the country that I'm on. And I just want to acknowledge the deep and continuous connection that Aboriginal people have to country and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. So my passion for heritage places I trained as an archaeologist. So I was learning stories of the past and how people lived and what they did from sitting in the field and digging holes for 12 hours a day, it felt like sometimes. And it was starting to understand these stories that really piqued my interest, but it wasn't until I worked with Aboriginal communities on Aboriginal archaeology that I really began to understand connection to country and how important the stories of the past and how we connect to the past is to people and how important it is to current people. And so with that in mind, I transitioned out of archaeology more to cultural heritage management, and it was really starting to work with groups and individuals and communities and seeing how passionate they were about their heritage places that got me passionate. And that's what's really has interested me and really excites me about working with heritage. It's not about the building, it's not about the place, it's about the people and how they connect to it.
Awesome. Because when I think about the heritage places or the heritage buildings over here in my city, and whenever I'm in those areas, what the thing that comes to my mind first of all is how I feel connected to that place, and the story that it creates, the story that is passing on over the years to us. I just have this one feeling in myself that people have lived in this place, and the walls can talk to me like that. That connection, and I guess this is something that you are saying as well, right? You connect to the people's stories and how it has passed on in the generations, right?
That's it exactly. Like an old building is just an old building, for
Yeah.
instance. But once someone has that connection to it, then it becomes part of their heritage. And that's when it becomes that's when it becomes valuable and important and worth protecting. So for me, it's all about connection. It's all about how people connect to the places around them.
Great. Okay, so you have partly answered my other question, but I will repeat that so I
Yeah.
can get more depth of it, which is tell us about the place where you live and about its heritage and your attachment to it.
Well, so I'm in Western Sydney, and I'm at the foot of the Blue Mountains. And so the area where I live, it's got a lot of history that speaks to the colonial expansion in Australia, so a lot of colonial sites. But since about the 1950s, it's had multiple layers of immigration into Australia. So initially, sort of your post-World War II immigration, then later on immigration from Asia, and it continues on today. In fact, I'm about 20 minutes from the Villawood Detention Centre, where a lot of new arrivals come. It's not like a detention centre, but it's where new immigrants come when they're so we've got multiple waves of immigration here, and then sitting underneath all of that immigration, that multicultural layer is, the Aboriginal story of the region that covers dispossession, conflict. There are massacre sites close to where I live. So that's the broader context. But what I love about where I am is I'm about 20 minutes from the World Heritage listed Greater Blue Mountains area. So I love nothing better than to go and experience the natural heritage of the area. And it's, we family go out, we go bushwalking, we go and enjoy it. So yes, there's all these different layers, but what I like is I like that natural heritage. That's what excites me on a personal level. And it's just, it's always nice and exciting to get out into the bush and enjoy nature.
Great. Okay, so since you have a very different perspective, I would love to know that how do you define a heritage place, and can you briefly explain the types of heritage places and the purpose they serve, like build natural and cultural heritage, etc.
Look, I know that for a heritage system to work, we have to have legal definitions of heritage. For you to have statutory protection, there's got to be a law that talks about heritage. But I think it's local communities and local people who are really essential in defining what is important to them, what is their heritage. And the purpose of these places is really informed by that connection and the associations that people have with them. So I was trying to think of a good example. We've got a lot of heritage listed railway stations in New South Wales. And they're significant for their technological aspects, their architectural. If you talk to a railway enthusiast, they'll tell you, these used to be railway stations. They need to be reinstated as railway stations. That's all they are. They're railway stations. Everything has to go back to what it was. But they can have a totally different level of meaning. So, for instance, in Australia, in the up until about the 1950s, there was government policy of forcibly removing Aboriginal children from their family and taking them away and putting them into institutions where they were fostered or adopted out to non-Indigenous families. And there's a few places. So, for instance, Burke is a small rural town, very rural in northern New South Wales. There's a railway station there. And there's a memorial at this railway station for these stolen generations, because for the Aboriginal communities up there, this was the last place that a lot of families saw their children, or children saw their parents. And then they were put on trains and they were taken through into Central Station in Sydney. And then siblings were split up. So you might have had a group of siblings come from rural New South Wales, get to central, but then they're split up and the girls go here and the boys go there and the older ones go there and the younger ones go there. And so when we talk about the significant heritage significance of a place, it's why it's important and the story that that tells and how that resonates with a particular group, a particular culture, a particular community. So I think the purpose that heritage places have lies in the stories they tell and the connections that those stories create and what they mean today. And so it's so like I can look at a railway station and go, I'm interested in it from an architectural point of view. It's a type 3 railway station and there's 10 of them left in the state. A railway enthusiast might talk about it from, this type of train comes through and the station was built at this time or whatever. For someone in the town, they talk back and they go, well, actually, I remember when I was young and we would turn up here once a week when the train came in with all the goods, and that was our trip into town. We'd come from the rural part, we'd go into town, meet the train. So they have different levels of meaning, and really the purpose they serve comes from those levels of meaning.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I used to think that certain places were created certain buildings were created a long time ago. Why aren't we calling them heritage places? It was just my curious self to know the stories about it, but there were no stories. It was not important for people. So now I understand why we don't pin them down as a heritage place, because yes, there were no stories associated to it, and stories are important to continue to keep the record of a place, and also to continue the legacy of it from passing on to generations. So yes, I understand that first of all we have to ask people what is important for them, and then we have to move on to preserving it and making it a part of history and making it a part of heritage place, right?
Exactly. And just to follow on that, perfect example. So in New South Wales used to be known as the Timber Bridge state. So lots of timber road bridges, historically important, technically important. And over the past decade or so, there's been a policy shift where a lot of these timber bridges have had to be dismantled because they're 150 plus years old. We don't have the timber necessary to restore them. So a real narrowing down of keeping the best of the best and acknowledging you can't keep them all. But through the process of coming to that decision, the government agency, and I wasn't a part of a government agency, I was just peripherally involved. And they would go out to communities, and sometimes they go to a community and say, this bridge is the best type in the state, and we're going to protect it, and don't worry, your bridge will be protected and everything. And the community go, actually, we don't care what type of bridge it is, as long as we can get our harvest across at harvest time and we can get freight through, don't care. And then they'd go to other communities and say, look, your bridge is in really bad condition. There's plenty of better examples. We're going to knock this down and give you a nice new concrete bridge. And the community goes, no, we've got a real connection with this timber bridge and its form and its history. So it's really difficult to, as a heritage expert or a government body, to come up and say this is going to be important to someone locally and this isn't. You really need to have that discussion locally. And because it's really the people who will tell you what's important to them.
Yes. So, okay. So this is going to be followed by this is
Yep.
going to be asked in the following questions. And yes, it's a major lesson that we need to involve people locally, and then we have to give our opinion. And because I think people know better than us, like the people who have been living there, they can guide us more on the materials and on the challenges that they face over the time. And then after negotiation, we can come up with a solution that is best for them and also for the place, right? So yeah,
Yep.
so what are the major challenges you face in conservation or management of heritage places?
Look, simply, it's going to be conflicting views. Unfortunately, when you have different stories, you have different connections, you have different approaches, you have different attitudes, you're never going to please everybody. And so that's really the major challenge, to go into a meeting, a community association meeting, and try and, well, you can't, it's impossible to get consensus, right? And when I have these meetings, when I've been involved with them in the past, the first thing I will always say is, I'm not going to lie to you, not everyone is going to be happy with the outcome from this. And quite possibly no one is going to be completely happy with the outcome from this. But it's about trying to build some sort of consensus and trying to make people understand your limitations, what you have to work with, and how you can work around it. And it's, managing expectations. So there are heritage purists who will say, here's this site, here's this building. The only way that we can preserve this is to rebuild this building using exactly the same materials, exactly the same technology, exactly the same methodologies as when it was built over 100 years ago. And then there's people who are going to go, well, actually, yes, there's this beautiful heritage building, and yes, it's a bit beat up and it needs some work and it needs some love. But if we can get it to a certain state, we can do something useful with it. And yes, it's not going to be as pristine as it was, but it's going to be reused. And the best way to preserve a heritage site is to reuse it. It's as simple as that. The moment you close a heritage site, a park, a building, whatever, and don't let anyone in there, it starts to degrade, and that's the end of its life. So sometimes, if you can just get people swimming in the same direction to get an outcome, manage those expectations, that is really the biggest challenge, because people have different perspectives, and trying to get them all to accept an outcome that doesn't necessarily fit what everybody wants, but if you can get a little bit of the way there. So if you can fix up the building and you pay special attention to special features which you really preserve and reinstate using traditional methods, so you give a bit to those purists. You can say, look, we can save the whole building and we can do these things really, really well. And then, you might get a community group. Like, there are some places where there are towns here that I've dealt with in New South Wales where there are no shops, which, is probably not necessarily unusual around the world, but, where there's no shops, where, you've got elderly communities who have to somehow get themselves half an hour to the next major town. Then you have heritage buildings sitting there not being used. Now, for that community, for a lot of people, they don't care if it's restored properly. As long as if it gets some work and you can put a shop in there, they're happy. If you can then do a bit of proper restoration, and then you keep the purists happy. So it's, yeah, getting all those things moving in the same direction, I'd say, is the biggest challenge.
Yes, and it's a process, and it's as much it sounds exciting, it must be draining, because bringing people together and getting them on same page, and then moving things towards work, towards betterment, it's a struggle. And so I wanted to ask, because for me, community engagement is very difficult thing because bringing people together, first of all, without triggering any emotional response from them, any emotional reaction from them, like, because what I have seen that there are, like you mentioned, there are the two extremes. One who is very emotionally attached to a place, and the second one who just want things to be smooth and functional, and they are up to any change. So how do you bring them on the common ground? Like, if you can share any example, that would be helpful. And like, what are the challenges in the community engagement, and how do you deal with them? Any sort of thing.
Yeah, look, I think so yeah, once again, probably not that example I was thinking about before, but we had another site, a former railway station, a small regional rural community, not even regional, rural, literally no shops in town, trying to find a way to reactivate it to get some sort of outcome for the community so it can be used to serve, give the community something that they need. And there was one gentleman who we went out there on our initial meeting, and he had a pile of notes and some books and talking about, oh, this is a rare concrete slab railway station, and what we need to do is we need to reinstate it, we need to rebuild it the same way. And you know, some of the other people in that particular association were saying, oh, but if we used it for this purpose, we could put, you know, this particular facility in this room. You know, and this gentleman's saying, well, what, you can't, because like, for instance, they were talking about potentially having a small laundromat in part of the building. And he said, you can't, because this room has never had a washing machine in there, so you can't put a washing machine in there. So those were the sorts of conflicts. And look, every site has its own unique challenges and local concerns, but what I think it comes down to, what's common is a desire to protect is what is important to the individual initially, and then to the group. And the way you do that, I agree, you know, community engagement can be very draining and very difficult. And how you get them, first of all, how you do that engagement is the important thing. You know, there are some communities and some cultural groups that they won't talk to you unless you get an invite. So unless they're introduced to you separately to the engagement, they're not going to be involved with it. So you've got to kind of get that invite, and you've got to find someone who will introduce you to this person to have a chat beforehand, not even about the project or the issue, just a face-to-face, yeah, g'day, my name's Gary, this is who I am, this is what we're trying to do, you know, and they go, oh, my name's Mike, blah, 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 you have a chat. And it's only after you've had that they're even going to think about being involved. It's the timing. I deal with a lot of rural communities. I might give someone a call and sort of say, oh, g'day, leave a message, Alison, how you been? It's Gary, let's have a chat. 3 weeks later, I'll get a call back and she's gone, mate, we've just been in the middle of harvest, so no one's been able to do anything. We finally got the space. So the challenges are, first of all, getting those contacts, understanding how best to engage with people, so that they're comfortable. That's a really, really important thing. And don't fight the fights yourself. You know, as a process, it takes multiple sessions. You know, it's not, government guidelines might say you go out, you speak to a community, tick, I've spoken to that community, done, we can move on the process. But if you're doing it properly, it takes multiple sessions, and you don't have to win the fight. This example with the guy with the cement station who's, no, you can't put a laundromat because there's never been anything in there. We just talked about the issues, talked about the fact that this building has to change if it's going to be adapted. 2 months later, they come back, they've got a plan to move forward, which changes the building. So that community had that own discussion with him and resolve those issues internally. That's really important. You can't come in and resolve the issues. There are some groups I've dealt with in the past where you literally cannot get the groups in the same room at the same time. I've had to go out and do consultation, and you talk to the bulk of the community and this group, and then you go out a couple of weeks later and you talk to this group, Group B, because Group B and Group A will not be in the same room at the same time. So, yeah.
Right. Yes, you're right that we have to know that how to engage a community. That's a leadership skill, definitely, that all the leaders must learn that. And the point that you raised, that we have to build trust among the people first, the expert and the community that we are engaging with. The trust is the most vital ingredient for that. Once the trust is built, we are able to make them talk about it, because um, this is the conclusion that I have got so far with all the interviews, because I used to struggle with how to engage the community, because communication is a very real struggle, because over the time we have been into isolation, and since I'm a mental health advocate as well, and I have worked on that a lot. So I know the importance and the significance of attachment stories to people, and how hard it is to bring them out of it, and how to make them talk about it, and then have no judgment for it. So it's a real struggle, and to take things forward compassionately, it's something that leaders have to learn. And yes, while you were explaining the way you were explaining it so calmly and so without any judgment, and with the passion, it was so encouraging to me, because there's a lot of frustration that I get, maybe because I'm young, and maybe I'm not used to it right now. So, but the way you were telling it, it was encouraging, that you take
Thank you.
people at their own pace, and then you evolve with the process, and things go smoothly later on. It can be hyped up at start, but it can go smooth in the later phases, hopefully, right?
That's right. That's right. And first of all, you described it much more succinctly than I did when you said establishing trust. So thank you for that. But that's right. It's about, you have to work with people at their own pace. People have their own lives. As invested as they are in something, they have their own lives. They have their own stuff that's going on. A lot of the organisations we deal with are volunteer community associations. So by the time I'm talking to them about how can we work with them around a particular building or a particular site, I'm talking with them at the end of the day when they've done their 8 hours at work, they've got the kids to and from school, the kids have gone to bed, and now they're dealing with this. So you really can't come in and go, mate, I've been at the computer since 6 o'clock this morning trying to get in touch with you. What the, where are you? So yeah, that's it. It's about building that trust. It's about working with people at their own pace, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot of
Patience
engagements.
and
Yeah,
engagements.
patience and yeah, a lot of connections. And it might just be an email here, a phone call here, a couple of visits here or there. But you can't just do it in one. You can't just do it in the first go.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, that it was a very helpful and meaningful advice. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so I really love talking about people. So I would love to know that what are the major concerns of people about their heritage places? Like, are there any unique or are there common factors, or if you can remember any particular concern of someone, um, because these things keeps us going. So I'd really love to know about that.
Look, I would say the major concern without fail, and although each particular place has its own idiosyncrasies, its own uniqueness, it's that people feel that the decisions are taken away from them. So particularly in rural, regional New South Wales, that there's a real perception and a real fear that someone in a major city, like sitting in Sydney, makes the decision and goes out. And by the time that they are being spoken to, they're not being consulted, they're being informed. And that is really the big concern. Now, whether once you go out into the regions, everywhere you go, whoever you talk to, it'll be slightly different, different sites, different outcomes they're trying to achieve. But I would say that is really the major, if you have to pick something that's consistent. So there's a saying, I don't know if you know New South Wales too well, but sort of you got Sydney in the middle, sort of on the coast. You've got Newcastle up the top, a couple of hours north, and you've got a sort of centre called Wollongong, a couple of hours south. In rural New South Wales, there's a perception that a lot of decisions are made in New South Wales, Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong, for the rest of the state. And that is something that consistently people are talking about, that these decisions are taken out of their hand. I might leave where I live and drive 6 hours to go and meet with a community group. Just the fact that, in fact, a few years ago, a lot of years ago now, in a previous role, I went to a place, so it's about 3 hours from Sydney. And I was working with the government agency at the time, and the heritage person for the local council who I was meeting with, she said, I have been dealing with this state government agency for the 12 years I've been in this job, and not once has anyone driven the 3 hours to come and meet with me in person. And that, I think, is really indicative of the concerns, particularly in rural and regional Australia, New South Wales, but I will say Australia-wide, that these decisions are taken out of their hands. And by the time that they have some input into it, they're being informed. They're not being consulted.
And this is the major concern and most important concern, definitely, because if I think about it, that decisions are being made for me, that can be really triggering for me. That leaves me first. It will make me defensive. I will not be able to accept anything, any change, and then I will maybe become detached from it, and I won't care about it, and I want
That's
not
right.
contribute anything to it. So yeah, that's the right connection about how things are happening, why there is so much defensiveness around things, because people are not being involved, their concerns are not being taken into granted. They are taking for granted. They are not being
That's right.
in consideration. Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. It was very useful and it was very required for the things that are happening around the globe, because people in the rooms are making decision for people being out, for people out there living up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So I would like to ask that what do you think about the role of heritage places in the role they play in the climate change mitigation?
Look, I think that the big role that heritage places can play is in really adaptive reuse. So the majority of carbon emissions that come from a building come from its construction. In the US alone, you're talking about 26% of non-industrial waste comes from demolition waste to buildings. So essentially, once you've had a building that's built, that's been there for 50, 100 years, you've got all that embedded carbon that you're not using up when you're trying to build a new building. You're not dealing with all the waste. So I think, to me personally, I think the really important role that heritage has in mitigating climate change sits around reuse of buildings and adaptive reuse.
Okay, so okay, I have a question here.
Yeah, sure.
In past, I had been to a place like I'm an architect, so we had a project that we were doing in the university, and we have been. It was a building. It wasn't very big. It was small, and it has served its purpose. In the earliest days, it has been a hostel. It has been utilized as a hostel, rooms for boys. And then later on, it was being used. It has been being used for the purpose of what do I say that? It's a hush terminal. Like it has an open courtyard and some rooms, so it is used for training people somehow. Like I was just relating to it as a story because I remember of being in that place, and I wasn't ready to demolish it for the project. I was ready to use it and build a new structure alongside it, and then then make a new complex of old and new and things like that. But I was encouraged to demolish it because it's not amazing structure. Like it wasn't appealing to many people, but it was appealing to me because it has been there for a long time. So in that, and yes, I have the same point that why demolish the old structure which is standing for a long time and it is in good shape as well. And those things that I'm really against demolishing things and then reconstructing it because it causes it money. It's costly thing.
That's right.
Yeah. So how do we tackle in that sense the people who are expert and who are in charge of us or who are in the authority of us? And it wasn't something that was being done on a literal basis. It was just an idea. It was just a hypothetical project. But you know, they were against it even in my mind. They were saying that don't even think about it. So
I think the way to tackle those sorts of issues is you have to try and find what the people are trying to achieve. So you treat it like you're going out to a community group and asking them, what do they think about this building? What are they trying to achieve? And then it becomes about how you pitch your idea. Because a lot of heritage management and success or failure really depends on how you pitch your idea. So if in that instance, if you're dealing with someone, and this is where doing a bit of research can come in handy. So for instance, if this was for a university and you've got a university and the university has a policy or a goal to say meet the UN SDGs, that gives you a really good in, and you can go, well, actually, yes, adaptive reuse might not give you a really good, it might not give you a brand new architectural edifice that you can point to and go, wow, but it can actually help you achieve this outcome. What is by keeping this building, at a really basic level, you can sit there, if you keep this building, what is the carbon offset for students at a university? Reusing a building and not building a new one, or reusing a building and building a smaller new building, actually offsets the carbon footprint of 300 students at that university. And then that becomes a success story that the university can tell. And it also becomes an argument, say, for them when they get asked the question, why did you keep this, unattractive old building when you could have built a new one? And they go, well, we kept this unattractive old building, as you put it, because carbon offsets, these are the benefits.
Yeah, yeah, that made sense. And yeah, we have to make case and we have to negotiate and we have to convince people. It doesn't come easy always.
That's right. It never does.
So,
Sorry, I missed that.
oh, I'm mute.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, what advice would you give to cities with great natural assets like gardens that have been cities identification for quite a long time? In terms of asset protection, maybe anything would you suggest?
So I was having to think about this one. I think the problem is, as heritage experts, we can fall into the trap that it's only us experts who have a role in preserving or managing these types of places. And I think we really need to democratize heritage management. So when you're looking at places with great natural assets like gardens, or it could be, national parks, it's looking at how you can get the community engaged with these sites, because I think once you get that engagement, once you get that connection, that's where you get the real drive to protect them. They become important to people and people want to protect them. People want to protect them, then governments are going to spend money on them. At a very practical level, if a site is popular, if people go to it, people are passionate about it, that is the site that a government's going to spend money on, as opposed to, allocating funds to, this site over here that no one really goes to or has much interest in. So, it's about democratizing how they're managed, getting people involved with it. So at the most basic level, it could be just having volunteer groups or volunteer organizations, friends of the park or friends of this site. But once you start to think beyond that, you can really play around with that idea. So for instance, let's take a garden, a historic garden that's in the middle of a city. Yeah. So we know that garden, the government, the local authorities spending money on the garden upkeep. So they've got horticulturalists, they've got gardeners, they've got different things. So what you could do is you could actually run a workshop where people pay X amount and they come along and they learn about some aspect of garden. I'm not a great gardener, so I don't know when to plant, pruning your trees, whatever. But for the garden itself, for this civic garden, these people aren't having some sort of esoteric workshop or a theoretical one. They're actually coming and working on the site for you. So as the site manager, Instead of having 2 gardeners working, you have 2 gardeners with 30 volunteers for 2 hours. You're also getting money because each of these people are paid $50, 100, whatever the number is, to come along on this workshop to get skills that they can then take back to their own garden. And then they've got this connection with the place, with this place. And, you know, if you can get school kids involved, you get school kids involved and you do this workshop, say, through schools, and then the kids can go home and do some little gardening at home, whether it's in a backyard or a window planter or something. But what those kids are going to do is they're going to take their parents there and they're going to go, oh, mum and dad, we did that. You see those plants over there? I planted those. And then that's going to create the connection. So it's, I think places like this, and I think this is something that governments at all levels don't do really well, is really being innovative about how they create connection and thinking about ways, new and different ways you can do that. Like in the Australian context, with a lot of Indigenous plants and native bush foods gardens, you know, there's opportunities where you can work with local Aboriginal communities for them to run tours. So you actually work with the community to create a business where they're sharing their culture, and all they're doing is taking a tour, say, through this native bush foods garden, but they're sharing their culture. Non-Indigenous European, non-Indigenous Australians, we can get a better connection, a better understanding of not just the garden, but of the Indigenous and the Aboriginal connection to that site. And then, but you also then create a business. So you're creating business for this particular group running tours. So like there's lots of different ways you can be really innovative about it. But I think it really comes down to creating meaningful engagement. And I know I've mentioned that before and I keep coming back to it, but it's all about the more people have connection, the wider, the deeper that connection is, the better chance you have of looking after these places, preserving them and having people care about them.
Wow, that's an awesome advice. Actually, this question was especially for my own city, because I just love the parks over here and I wanted to preserve them and to be active, and I want them to be more lively and more active. And I'm going to follow this idea. Definitely, definitely. I'm going to
Go
implement
for it.
this idea. Yeah. And then I'll come back to you. I hope to do it in the near future and let's see how it goes. Thank you so much.
I would love to hear how that goes.
Great. Okay, so the questions that we have done so far were exclusively for you, and now we are heading
Yeah,
on to the rapid fire, which I ask everyone.
sure.
So
I'll be rapid. I'll be
okay,
rapid in my responses.
that's great. So what drives, what keeps you focused?
Look, passionate about giving people the skills and the opportunity to meaningfully engage the places around them, you know, to find those places that are important with them, for them, and find a way for them to engage with them in a way that resonates with them. I think that's it. I think it all comes down to that idea of connection, connecting people to places, connecting people to other people.
That's a great cause. That's a great cause. And when we see this thing happen, it's truly fulfilling, definitely. Okay. So would you like to share any moment that made you feel proud of the work you do?
Look, there was in the north of the state, north of New South Wales, there's a place called Evans Head. It has a former World War II aerodrome. I was involved with the community group up there. When I first got involved, there were 2 buildings left from the World War II era, and one of them was a derelict hangar. Managed to work with the community group there, find funding, get them through all the heritage approvals. So it's heritage listed, so everything had to go through getting approvals from the government. At one point, the local council said, no, we have to knock this building down, and we managed to stop that. They've now built into one of the most successful aviation museums in New South Wales. They, in fact, when the Australian Air Force decommissioned their F-111 fleet, they handed out 6 F-111s for museums, and they managed to get one. And look, and I got invited up to the opening there when that happened, and they actually made me a little plaque just for my small part, and I was absolutely stoked. That was the proudest moment in heritage by far.
That's awesome. That sounds amazing. Okay. And any hardest moment of your work life, and anything you learned from it or something like that?
Look, I'd probably say my struggle moment was working for government and seeing how government treated different parts of government differently to the general public. And look, example was one day we got a call from a local member of parliament who said, I drive past this house, heritage house, and it's all derelict and you should do something about it. And got told, write a nasty letter to the owner and tell them to fix it up or else. That same day, we get a call about a government-owned building in similar condition. And sort of the boss says, no, we can't upset them. So that was a telling moment, and sort of for me, I felt that as government, we should be leading the way. We should be held to a higher standard. But we got through that. But I think that was probably it.
That's okay. So it was basically the confrontation of your values. It was against your values.
Yes,
So
that's
this
right.
was
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I understand. I understand that. Okay. So do you have any favorite quote or mantra that you love to keep repeating or remember when you do some work?
Yep, I do. In 1961, an American urban theorist, Jane Jacobs, wrote a book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And in it, she says that new ideas, I'm paraphrasing, new ideas need old buildings. So it's the idea that the new owes a debt of gratitude to the old. And I will roll that quote out as often as I can. Particularly when someone's saying, no, we can't keep the old because we've got to have the new building. Take your example. The new is reliant on the old. You can't separate them.
Nice. And yeah, I love that how people still quote Jane Jacobs, and that we are all connected because of the soul. Like our values are connected, and that's why maybe we are all connected to the old and new people and the ideologies. Okay. So do you have any opinion about Pakistan or placemaking in Pakistan?
Look, I don't know, excuse my pronunciation will be out. I was actually just reading recently the Sindh, SINDH government and their Sindh, so they've got an initiative to almost create public-private partnerships for the protection of cultural heritage. So just recent, and that stuck out of me. I thought that was, on the face of it, as it was reported, pretty amazing, because that idea that as a government you can partner up and allow private companies to contribute to a fund to look after cultural heritage is not something that's done very well. I think in theory, a lot of people think it's good, but in practice, I don't think it happens a lot. So that's forefront of my mind. I must admit, I'm not too across what's happening in terms of placemaking in Pakistan. So, but yeah, that's what's sprung to mind just recently in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, so I'm in the part of Pakistan which is in Lahore. It's a part of Punjab, and I hope that the government follows what they're saying. That's all I can say right now.
Fair
Because-
enough.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay. So, lastly, is there any advice that you would like to give to the young professionals who are joining in?
Yeah. And this has been something that I bang on about a lot to whoever will listen, is that heritage and how we look after heritage needs to be a bottom-up process. It should never be top-down. It's the people who are there, it's the communities who assign significance, who understand importance, who have that connection. Governments and heritage professionals, our job is just to help them navigate the legislation, I think. So it's not about us going out and saying this is important and this is how you look after it. It's about us saying what is important, how do you want to look after it, and then doing what we can to facilitate that to happen. That's probably it.
Great. Thank you so much, Harry. It was lovely talking to you, and I made a meaningful connection with you through our conversation. I had learned a lot of things, and definitely I would love to stay in touch and learn more from you in the future. Thank you for your time and take very good care of yourself.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to talk, and definitely I agree. Reach out anytime.
Great. Thank you so much and
Take care.
take care. Bye bye.
Bye. See you, mate.